Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, YouTube viewers. My name is Tuck Davian, and welcome to the very first edition of Painter's Pit. I will be your host for this video, and today we are going to be painting from the Battletech universe a Mad Cat. So if you'd like, grab your paints, grab your brushes, and let's head on over to the craft table. And here we are at the craft table. Now today we are going to be painting the Clan Jade Falcon Iota Galaxy colors onto this Mad Cat. And it uses an emerald green base coat with highlights in bone white and silver. That having been said, here are the things that you will need to do this today. We have Waywatcher green. We have Bealton green. We have Athonian camo shade. We've got Nuln Oil. Moot green, Mephiston red, Kislev flesh. I know it's hard to see, but that's what it says. Pig iron. You can use lead belcher in place of this if you like Citadel paints. And Morrow white. You can use ceramite white if you like Citadel in place of that. The brushes that I'm going to use today are a very small detail brush, a little bit bigger of a detail brush, two mid to large sized base coating brushes, a small dry brush, a medium sized dry brush, a large dry brush, and a washing brush. Some of the other things I like to keep handy here at the table in case I need them is an X-Acto knife, just in case you have something you gotta cut off. A nail file, in case you get some sprues or something like that, you gotta file them down. Tweezers, in case of anything on the hex base you need to just pull off. And fingernail clippers. In the case of errant pieces of flash or, things like that, you've got a clip. That's why I like to keep those handy. The spray primer that I recommend is Duplicolor Automotive Sandable White. Goes on looking thick, but it dries real thin. This is the kind of stuff that I like to use. To finish the miniature, I prefer dull coat. You can get any, Michaels or something like that. Got my fresh water here, and I've got good old isopropyl alcohol just in case I mess something up beyond all return. You can always fix it by starting over. Keep my glue handy here. This will be what we use on the terrain later on, that sort of thing. And we have the mascot, Little Bub. Now I'm going to take this thing outside, but before I do that, I want to give you a little recommendation. These little sprues here that come with the miniatures, that the limbs and such are attached to, what I do is I save these. And here's why. Take the fingernail clippers and you just cut them right off, and you take the bits that you've cut off and you throw it into your paint jars, and it acts as an agitator. I'm going to shake this and you can hear it. That's what's in there, much like what you have in your can of spray paint. So, now that we've gone over all that, let's take this outside. Alright, let's get some primer on it. First thing you want to do is make sure that you're in a nice, well-ventilated area outside so that the primer won't get anybody's eyes or it won't harm anybody with the fumes, anything like that. I like to do it right here in my front yard. You get some kind of paper, something like that to put down so that you don't prime over anything you don't want primed over. Got my primer right here. Now, how I like to apply this is just even shots. And I like to go back and forth. And that's all. You don't need to go too heavy on it. You don't need to you don't need to do any of that. Just back and forth. That's the kind of motion you're looking for. And I'm going to get the back while I'm over here too. Anything you think you've missed, just give it a light dust. Make sure you've got as much of the miniature covered as you want. And at this point, you're going to have to let it hang out, because at some point you'll have to tilt it over so you can get the underside and the bottom parts of the miniature. So let it dry. Duplicolor tends to dry pretty quickly, so you'll want to come back to it in 5 to 10 minutes and it should be good to go. Now, I do believe the base is good enough for me to pick up. So let's get that in there. See if we can focus, Alamagocus. There we go. She's looking good. We'll come back to this bad boy in about 5 to 10 minutes. And we're back. Now, this miniature didn't take that long to dry. It only took 3 to 4 minutes tops. But typically you want to give it enough time if you're not using the same kind of primer, just to make sure everything's dry so you don't get fingerprints all over it. Now, what we're going to do is just set this bad boy on his back. And that's going to uncover all the bits that I wasn't able to get the first time around. And we're going to do the exact same thing that we just did. Now, you may not exactly be able to get every square inch of the miniature covered, but if you don't, that's okay. Don't want you to stress too hard about it. Just make sure you get as much as you think you need. And we're going to let it dry in that position, and then what we're going to do is we're going to flip it over, and we're going to do the rear, and at that point, priming should be finished. And we're back for the last stage. As you can tell, the sun is no longer with me. I'm just going to turn this guy on his front here as best I can. I'm going to turn it a little to the side here, just so that you can see what I'm doing. And there will be parts of the miniature on the underside that have not yet been exposed to the primer. So we're just going to hit it with a light dust and we'll be done. And once that dries, that should be the end of it. So we're going to wait just a few minutes for the primer to dry, and we're going to get ourselves back to the craft table. Alright, now I'm going to show you this real fast because I've already applied one layer of Waywatcher Green glaze to this guy. And the reason that you didn't see me putting it on there is because I had filmed that segment with the camera entirely out of focus, because I'm a doofus. But fortunately, there's good news. That means I'm going to be doing more coats of this to thicken it up and darken it up in certain places. And you will get to see the techniques that I get to use in that segment coming up. But I wanted to give you a look at how thin this glaze is going to look right off the bat, and let you know that it's going to darken up, but this is essentially how we're going to be doing things with glazes and washes today. Mainly because I want to get across the idea that you can almost paint with anything, and all you have to do is practice. Now, I'm going to let this dry, and then we're going to come back in just a few minutes, and we'll talk about how to apply more glaze. Alright, we're back for coat number 2. Now, this is all dry, so I want to give you a good look at what it looks like once it's dried up. You'll see how all the glaze is just sinking into those cracks there. And this is really what you want, because when you dry brush it later, that's going to look very good. And focus. Very good. Now, this is the second coat of Waywatcher Green. I want to get that in there real fast. This is where I started with this. Now, I don't want this to be too thin, so when I dip my brush in the water, I'm going to try and remove most of the water from the brush, because this is the primary color that I'm going for here, so I want it to look as bright as possible. Now, a little bit of this stuff goes a long way. I call it liquid skill because it does a lot of the work for you. You just short, even strokes, and it sinks right into the cracks. And all you have to do is let physics and gravity do their thing, and it will come out looking phenomenal. One of the reasons I like painting with washes and glazes when I get the opportunity, and this just seemed like a perfect opportunity to do something like that. And you'll notice I'm not exactly going real heavy on this. You'll notice that my brush strokes aren't exactly all over the place. It's just short, even strokes, just back and forth, back and forth. It's almost like doing the Konami code, going up, down, left, right, left, right. And that's really where you're going to want to keep it at, is just short, even strokes with trying to avoid the areas that you don't want to be green later. Now, of course, you're not going to be able to avoid every single area that you don't want green, but that's all right, because when you paint over it with the actual paint, then nobody will really be the wiser, so it's not the worst thing in the world if you get some of the areas that you don't want to be green later. Just concentrate on getting as much of this covered as you possibly can, and it looking the color that you want. That's what's the most important thing here. And I'm only dipping the brush in the glaze just a little bit at a time. I'm not putting a whole heck of a lot each time. I just want enough to get each individual area that I'm working on at that moment. That's what's really important to me. And I like to hold it by the base, that way I don't touch the rest of the figure while I'm working on it. Slow and steady wins the race here. Now, I've gotten this out of the way, so what I'm going to do is pause here, and I'll come back once I've finished this second coat, and we'll have a look-see at how it looks once I've gotten that down on there. And the second coat of Waywatcher Green is down. I want to give you a look at this while it's still drying. See how the color's really starting to come in now. Still a little thin for my taste, so I'm going to give it at least one more coat before I start doing anything else to it. But I just wanted to have you look at it, give you an idea of what this can look like just by painting with a glaze instead of using paint. And you can see how the glaze that has settled into the cracks here is much darker than the rest of it, and that is good. That's what you're looking for. And we're going to put a separate wash over that later just to kind of help accentuate those details. But at least now you get an idea of just how awesome working with washes can be. All the details here are very crisp, very clean, and you just don't get that kind of detail with base coats otherwise. So that's in my experience anyway. Yours may be different. I would, if I were you, invest in a small desk fan so that these things can dry much faster, which is what I'm going to do now, is set mine in front of a fan so that it dries off, and then have some dinner. We'll come back, have a look at it, and see whether or not we need another coat, even though I think we're going to. Okay, it looks like I was right, and that I'm going to want a third coat of Waywatcher Green on this guy. But here's what it looks like when it's dry. I think it's starting to look real good. Just needs a little more to get where I want it to be. Now, the application isn't going to change any from the last segment, so I won't bore you with the details here of watching me go over that again. So what I'll do is I'll go ahead and take another pause while I apply the third coat, and we will come back once it's dry to see what that looks like. And coat number 3 is dry. Let's have a look-see. Yeah, it looks fantastic. And this is nothing but Waywatcher Green glaze. I have done nothing else to it. When we dry brush all this later, it's going to have a fantastic effect. But now, it's time for the next phase. We will exchange our Waywatcher Green for Battletech Green. And I want to give a shout out to the fellas at Top Deck Games who gave me theirs when I went in to buy it because they were out and knew that they wouldn't be getting any more before the holiday was over because, you know, of Christmas and all that. So, big thanks to the fellas down at Top Deck Games. And I also want to give a shout out to my friend Kenneth, goes by the call sign Rogue, who provided this miniature. So, thank you, sir. Now, for the Battletech, what I'm going to do is dip my brush in the water, but I'm going to leave most of the water in it. I'm only going to dab my brush just a couple of times on the towel because I don't want this to be really thick. Battletech Green is dark, so if I put too much over what I've already done here, it will completely overpower it, and it will be as if I didn't put any on there at all of the Waywatcher Green, and then I will have to put it in the alcohol and strip it and start all over again, and I'm really not looking forward to that. So we're going to leave most of the water in this brush to thin out this Battletech Green. I'm only going to dip just the end of the brush in there. I don't need a crazy amount here. I'm just wanting enough to fill in these cracks so that you can see the darkness in the cracks here, but still have a bright green undercoat. So it's going to be the same thing as last time, just short strokes, but I'm not going to try and coat every single thing. I'm only going to hit areas that I think, you know, could use something like that. And I'm really going to go easy on this because right now, that is the last thing I want, is to put too much and have it completely overpower everything I've already done. Now, I will probably end up using less than a teaspoon of this Battletech Green to accomplish this task. So, just a little dab will do ya. That's all you need. You just want to make sure you're hitting the crevices. And you only want to darken this up just a bit, not a crazy amount. Otherwise, you'll be hosed and you'll have to start over. So, not what I want to see you have to do there. And again, leave most of the water in the brush so that while you're doing all this, it's not coating it too thick. You notice how, again, I'm not really going crazy with my brush strokes here. Just enough to hit the areas that I want to hit. Leave it at that. Now, I'm going to go ahead and take another break here. And we'll come back once I've gotten all this done. All right, let's have a look-see. Let's focus in on it. Now you'll notice that Battletech has sunk into those cracks there, and it's also darkened up the Waywatcher Green just a little bit. And that's to be expected, and there's nothing wrong with that. But it's still a little too dark after that for my taste, so what we're going to do is bring that brightness back with some dry brushing. And I had planned on that all along, so dry brushing is something that used to daunt me, and I used to be very afraid of it. We'll pull out the large dry brush for this, and we are going to switch the Battletech Green out for Moot Green. there. But really, this isn't anything to be afraid of. So I'm just going to get some of that paint in the lid there, pop it off. Now, I like to cut the lids off of my paint jars. I don't know exactly why, but that's just something I like to do. It's not as important to do that with washes, but now, this is a very quick and dirty process. This is not something you have to be super precise with or worry about going slow and steady. This is fast, quick. All you do is dip your brush in the paint like this. Make sure you got a little bit on there. You don't need a whole lot. And then just draw some X's on your towel here. Towels like these, you know, dish towel. You can get at any dollar store. Just make sure you don't see a terrible amount of paint coming off. That's all there is to it. And if you see too much paint coming off, just dust it off until you don't. I like to test it on my skin sometimes just to see how much I'm actually going to get. And here's how we do this. Like I say, he's going the distance. He's going for speed on this one. Just give it a test brush real fast to see what kind of paint's coming off, and if you think it's too much, dust it off on the towel again, and this looks fine. So here we go. I'm just going over this real fast, not trying to be precise. I'm just trying to hit all of the edges of this unit here and make sure that all of the parts that stick out get a little bit of paint on them so that the details will pop out just that much more. Hit the underside here. And you want to just dry brush this as much as you feel like you actually need to. This is your miniature, it's your world. You know, you do with it what you like. And once you feel like you're done, you know, then you can be done. But be judicious and just, you know, look it over. And once you feel like you've got enough, call it a day. And the only reason I'm doing this dry brush now, before I paint all this other stuff, is so that I don't have to be precise with it. So I can just swish my way around here and not have to worry about hitting all the other colors that I'm going to paint onto these white areas later. This allows me to get the dry brushing done that I want to get done without affecting anything else that I might do later on. Honestly, that's probably enough. Make sure I get perfect. Alright. I threw the brush in the water at that point. When you throw the brush in there, that means it's all over, because it's going to take a while for that to dry back out. Let's get a good look. Now, as you can see, the Battletech green looks a lot more sunk in now than it used to, especially on that hip joint there. You can see it. I get a real good close-up. And a lot of these edges and high points of the mech stick out. And that is the effect that you're going for with a dry brush there. A good dry brushing almost has the effect of a deep wash. Some highlights there. I think it's looking pretty good. Especially the undercarriage here. Yeah, I really like that. And see how the shade there on the middle torso pops right out at you? I think this guy is definitely ready to go on to the next stage. And now it's time to start putting some of the finishing touches on this. And during this segment, what I'm going to do is focus specifically on the feet here and these little guns on the side and the missile racks. Now, all of these are going to be done in P3 pig iron. And the only other thing I'm going to need for this particular portion is the Nuln oil that I talked about earlier, and that's going to be for washing the areas to make it look more detailed once we get finished with them. So at this point, I'm going to put away the brush that I've used for this entire project so far, which has been my large, base coat brush. And I'm going to switch to my smaller base coat brush here, so you can get an idea about the size. Now, I'm not going to need a crazy amount. Again, I'm going to dip my brush in the water, and I'm going to dab most of it off. I just want to thin this down a little bit so that the wash has a chance to be able to work. I'm just going to put a little bit on the end. I don't need, a crazy amount for this. And I'm just going to hit the feet. The only thing I'm going to worry about right now. And you'll know you've thinned your paint down enough if you can see the details through it as you go. If it's not quite thinned enough, then it'll be obscuring those details, and that's how you'll know, well, I need to thin it down just a little bit more. Now, for the underside of this foot here, I can just kind of go a little crazy because I don't have to worry too hard about painting something, I don't want to paint. Just kind of try and save time. Cover as much of this area as I possibly can. And with something like this, you're looking for mainly just real short brush strokes. You don't want to go too wide, because then what'll end up happening is you'll hit some of those green areas and you'll have to try and fix that. And that'll be no bueno. It'll be a lot of work is what it'll actually be. And I'm going to go ahead and finish up these feet. And we'll come back in just a few minutes to talk about the gun barrels and the missile racks. Okay, now for the wash, all I'm going to do is take my wash brush here and just put a little bit on the end. I don't need a crazy amount. And I'm going to just paint it right on there. And I am going to allow physics and gravity to do all the work for me. And that black is going to settle into those cracks, and it's going to bring out the details in the silver bits that I just painted. Your motions here don't need to be, jerky or crazy. You just want to cover the area with wash. On the underside of this foot, though, I can be a little more liberal with how I use the brush. But by and large, you don't want to go crazy. Just make sure you get it on there evenly. Cover as much as you want. And physics will do all the work for you. This is probably one of the best and most fun parts of bringing a miniature like this to life, is the ease with which you can use that wash. And let's get a real close-up look of what that looks like. Bang. And all you have to do is let this dry, and that'll be all there is to it. Now I'm going to do the other foot, and then what I'm going to do is come back to this, because the parts remaining that I still want to make silver are going to be these little accordion looking things back here and the side guns like we talked about earlier. So I'm going to go ahead and finish washing that foot and then come back to do the other parts. Okay, second verse, same as the first. have a look at this other foot here. Again, you may notice I got some on the hex base, but once you put the grass on there, nobody will be the wiser. Now, let's get those back, or Achilles heels, as I like to call them, done. Same thing we did before. We're going to stick with our small-sized base brush here, dip it in the water, just dab it off so the paint stays thinned, but not, you know, so thin you can see right through it. Now this is going to require a little more precision out of you, so just be careful as you're doing this. You'll hold the miniature in a steady position, and you're just going to take your brush and go in motions like this. Okay? So if you were sitting, you know, where I was sitting, it would be vertical. You'll just try and get as much as you can without touching the green. And this is like what I said earlier. If you get some of the wash on areas that you don't want to have green, it's not going to be a big deal, because when you paint over it, no one will know, and no one will be the wiser. So just be as gentle, as careful with this as you can. And if you thinned your paint right, it will almost act as if it was some kind of silver wash, just settling into those cracks there, so that when you apply the Nuln Oil wash, everything will settle in and it will look beautiful. Flip it over. I know it's kind of difficult to see here, but you want to do the exact same motions. I don't even think you need to put more than just a dab each time on your brush to get the effect that you want. Don't hurry here. There's no reason for you to go fast after you've done all this work with the wash. Take your time. Just hit only the areas that you need to hit, to avoid you having to go over and fix anything. Now let's get a good look in there. Yeah, that's about how it should look. You'll notice you can still see a little bit of that green poking through. That's okay, because when I put that Nuln Oil wash on there in just a minute, it will be as if it never existed that way. And that's the beautiful thing about washes. When you do that kind of thing, it covers up a lot of anything that you might have missed. So don't worry about, oh, I made a mistake, oh, I messed this up, or I need to put more paint on. I have a phrase that I like to use, that a lot of people like to use, and I call it, it all comes out in the wash. But there's a painting pun for you. Now, that paint shouldn't take too long to dry. You know, if it looks like it's still glistening, give it just a minute. There's no reason to rush anything here. However, you'll notice that it dries pretty quickly. I'm just going to make sure I get just the end in here. And I'm not going to use the wash brush for this, because the wash brush is too big for such a small area. So I'm just going to stick with the same brush that I used to paint the pig iron color onto. And all you got to do is just go in vertical strokes toward you. And the wash will fill in all of the cracks and all of the areas that you thought were going to look green. And if you can still see the green once you're done and once the wash dries, then put more wash on. There's nothing, you know, wrong with that, and it's not going to ruin any of your work. So if you feel like you need more, just put more. Again, as I've said plenty of times, this is your miniature. You do with it what you feel like you need to do. Don't let anything stop you. Just add it wherever you feel like you need to add it to get the look that you're going for. And if you feel like you need to add more, what you do is you just let it dry and you put that second coat on there. Let's have a look at this. That is pretty much what we're looking for there. I can still see a little bit of that grain, but that's not a problem because what I can do is dry brush over that. And you notice that the wash has filled most of the areas that I want filled, but not really messed with too much of what I don't. So I'm going to go ahead and paint the other side and we'll come back in just a little bit. Okay, let's get a quick look. I really feel like that's turned out the way that I want it to. Just the right mix of silver and green there. Now we're going to work on these side guns. And for this, I'm going to use the small detail brush, not the smallest one that I have, but one of the smallest. Or one of the smaller ones anyway. Just dip it right in the water to thin your paint out. Just dab it a little bit. Going right back for the pig iron once again. Big droplet of water on the end there. Now you don't need a lot because this is such a small area that you're going to work with here. So just dab the end in your paint and hold it at an angle where you can see. And again, this is going to be vertical strokes toward you, not away from you if you can avoid it. And you'll try to go around 360 degrees. You don't have to be real slow about this because you're only going over the top. Try to cover as much of each area as you can by brushing toward you. As long as you cover the entire gun, it will be set. And each time you have to move it in such a way that when you are painting, you're painting toward you, not away from you. I always find that if you're painting in vertical strokes toward you, you have more control over what you're doing. And the only time you'll want to go horizontal on this is once you've covered every other inch of the gun and you've just got to get the bits that are closest to the body. That's where you want to be as careful as absolutely possible. And I've lost my light source. But hey, we're rolling, so we'll come right back just as soon as I'm finished with all of that.